Good evening and welcome. I'm so glad you could join us today. My name's Eileen Hirschnall, and I am the Deputy CEO and Chief Legal Officer at PEN America, an organization whose mission is to unite writers and their allies to celebrate the power of the written word and champion the freedom to write. This is our 20th PEN World Voices Festival, and since 2005, the festival has stayed true to its original mission to celebrate the power of storytelling and literature and translation, and to convene global voices across borders, language, and culture. Oh, I didn't think I had to do that. Yeah, I'm a lawyer. They don't teach you this. But if anyone wants to sue, go for it. So I hopefully spoke loud enough. I'm not going to go back. I'll just keep going. So over the last years, PEN America has tracked an alarming rise in book bans across the United States, and our Freedom to Write Index, which just came out, tracked the cases of over 300 writers who were detained or imprisoned around the world for their writing or exercising their freedom of expression. In this moment of censoriousness, the festival will honor the power of literature and celebrate the voices that illuminate and interrogate what divides us and help us imagine new futures. This year, we're proud to present over 35 events featuring more than 100 writers over 4 days of celebration, dialogue, and cultural exchange. For those of you who are new to PEN America, we are a member-driven organization. We have members in every U.S. state and chapter cities across the country, from Detroit to Tulsa, from Birmingham to Miami. We welcome all of you to help bring our mission to life. Check your program for more information on how to join PEN America as a member. We thank our members and our bookstore partner, McNally Jackson. I also want to share special thanks to the Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment, the Department of Cultural Affairs, the New York State Council on the Arts, and the National Endowment for the Arts and Amazon Literary Partnership for their invaluable support for our work. For your safety, before we begin, please take note of the exits in case of an emergency. Now I am especially pleased to introduce today's event, Disappearing Acts, Censorship in American Theater, which will explore the many forms of theatrical censorship, from unauthorized script changes to outright cancellations, and to look at how the current political climate is reshaping the theater world. Since theater emerged as an art form, it has been a battleground for free expression. How do playwrights navigate the pressure to self-censor? And what does the future hold for artistic freedom on stage? Pulitzer Prize-winning playwright and recipient of the MacArthur Genius Grant Fellowship and one of our PEN America board members, Lynn Nottage, will moderate this eye-opening conversation with distinguished playwrights Carlyle Brown, you can see down in Mississippi, recipient of the 2018 William Ing Distinguished Achievement in the American Theater Award, Moisés Kaufman, who co-wrote and directed the HBO film adaptation of his play, The Laramie Project, which I've seen many times, which received 2 Emmy Award nominations, and Lisa Kron, writer of the book and lyrics for Fun Home, in collaboration with composer Jeanine Tesori, which won 5 2015 Tony Awards, including Best Book, Score, and Musical, and was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. So thank you all for coming today. Thank you to our guests for agreeing to take part in what promises to be a wonderful event. So please join me in welcoming now Lynn, Carlyle, Moisés, and Lisa to the stage.
Hello, everyone. I'm just going to do a mic check. Is the mic okay? Okay, great. How is everyone? I know that that's such a fraught and complicated question, but I just, it's my impulse to ask that question. But I just want to say how delighted I am to be here with Moisés, Lisa, and Carlyle. They're all writers who I admire greatly because they're people who write with great intention and great purpose and are always in dialogue with this moment. So I just want to say thank you for continuing to write such robust plays and not shying away from difficult truths. As you all know, theater and the arts were in this extremely precarious moment. And Trump has appointed himself the president of the board of the Kennedy Center. The federal government has banned 350 words, and our fault lines are continuing to shift, and our cultural institutions are very much under siege. But the attack on theater artists and our free expression isn't new. This is something that's been going on for a long time, and often we're the canaries in the coal mine. Before things get censored out in the rest of the world, we find that very often high school plays are the first things that get banned and let us know the ways in which the wind is going to blow in the future. But that said, we're feeling this attack so much more acutely than we have in the last few years. There's a sense of language and ideas that are being policed in ways that are now so dangerous and so frightening. And I know that each of you has been in a situation where you've had works that either have been censored or have been canceled or have been redacted. And so I want to just begin the conversation by asking very specifically questions about your individual work. And since Carlyle, you're sitting closest to me, I will begin with you. You had a rather extraordinary situation very recently with the production of your play Down in Mississippi, which was at Texas Wesleyan University, which was halted by black students over the objection of the use of the N-word, which was being used very much in a historical context in a play that was about the civil rights movement. But according to the students, they felt triggered by the language and pushed for it not to be produced. And so I'm wondering whether you can talk just a little bit about the play itself and the circumstances that led to the very controversial cancellation of that particular work.
Um, Down in Mississippi is
Yep.
okay. Down in Mississippi is a play about it takes place in 1964, and it's about the registration of black voters in Mississippi. And I maybe in history, that's the event that the three civil rights workers, Cheney, Swarner, and Goodman, were assassinated, executed, whatever you might say. Um, and that's kind of what the play is about. It's a three-character play, and trying to mix things up a little bit about. I'm really impressed when I look at the history of these young people, and that's what they were. They were young people that were in the SNCC in Mississippi. If you were among that group, if you were 24, you were old. You were a veteran, and I don't think really there was ever a multicultural movement before the 60s, except for maybe the abolitionist movement. So that these were all young people who didn't really have much kind of contact with each other. They came from different kind of social classes, and they were going to go and do this very dangerous thing, together. Um, so the censorship, or whatever might call it by the play, came from these black students, and they objected to the N-word. And when I got involved, or when I was aware of it, it was like in the middle of the week, and the play was going to open that Saturday. And so this thing just came up, this group of black students. I don't know if it was all the black students, but this group of black students got together, and they wanted this play not to be done. I was called in on Zoom so that they could talk to me, and it was really kind of weird setup because it was, there was a screen like this, and they had, my face up on the screen, big ass face up on the screen. And then the people who supported the play were sitting there in front of me. So it, it was, I sort of felt like, yeah. Well, anyway, so, and then we tried to have the discussion, but it wasn't a discussion. Well, first of all, I'll tell you the truth. I was really gobsmacked by the fact that these black college students were not wanting to look at this history, because of the N word. I felt I needed to restrain myself to not say what I thought of them for doing this. But, because it was kind of so their reasons for the N word was that it was, and I don't know, this might be a generation gap thing, but that they were being harmed by the use of the word. And, well, yeah, that's what the word's for. It's there to terrorize you. So that's, and I guess they figured that they could address the N word or whatever their environment was in Texas West, and whatever kind of experience that they had with racism in that school. I wasn't really aware of it. I was just there. So I tried at first to listen, and they asked me, why did you, they counted them. They said, you did it 9 times. I said, well, I'm just trying to poke the bear. That's what I feel that's what we're going to do. And so the irony to me was that the play is about people their age who went towards harm, and their efforts, ended up being, passing the Civil Rights Act, and the Voters' Rights Act. And, it was a terrible time for these young people. I mean, it was like, totally like scary. And very much, I think, similar to the world that we live in now, or we're about to live in, right? Where black people in Mississippi had nowhere to go to address their grievances, right? They were, there was nothing sort of manipulated at the ballot box. They just could not vote. Well, they did have things like if you could guess how many jelly beans were in a jar, you could register. That kind of, obvious sort of nonsense oppression. And so I guess, more than that, except that it was just, other than my feelings about the whole thing.
Yeah, so I'm
That's it in a
really
nutshell.
curious because I read a little bit about it, and they said that the conversation really came out of their frustration with the way in which DEI was being handled on campus, and that there was harm that was being done. And one of the things that when I talk to my students, I talk to them a lot about the difference between harm, what harms us and what challenges us. And there are things which we can point to in which, we feel actively poked and blood spills, but then there are things that challenge us, which may cause us to, wrinkle our foreheads, and it may be really frustrating. I've certainly been challenged when I go to the theater, but I appreciate when it makes me think more deeply. And so the questions that I want to ask you is like, what happens when our pain, when the complexities of our experiences are redacted? Because we in this culture are so resistant to engaging with anything that gives us discomfort, but I feel like on some level that's what art's meant to do. It's meant to ruffle our feathers. It's meant to, turn over a stone and force us to look at all of what's under it. And so I'm putting that question to you is like, what happens when our stories and when our histories are erased because they cause people discomfort?
Well, I don't know. For me, comparing these students with the students that went down to Mississippi, first of all, like, they needed to see that play. They needed to read that play because those were the tools that they needed. And I remember, that's my generation who went down to Mississippi, and I'm wondering if that's where they're at, what can they do for us? What can they do for themselves? When the rubber hits the road, when the shit hits the fan, that just, and why, why would that? Why, it's been a long time since I've been in college, but why would college students not investigate or explore a word? Why would they even show up into this room and demand something and didn't really have any rationale besides they were harming? It seemed to me that they were committing a political act. It was an extortion that, like, whatever reason that we're harmed, we're going to stop this. You're not going to do it without any regard of what anybody else wants. And so it's not like an innocent act of innocent, harmful people. They're trying to extract something using what they feel is their power, which I guess they did have some power. And, the play was not performed, not canceled.
And so it was ultimately canceled.
Yeah.
And I mean, just one follow-up question, and I don't know whether it's fair for me to ask, but how did it make you feel?
Well, I can't use those words there. I mean, one of the things about the play, what I try to do about the play, is the kinds of choices that these young people had to make to go down to Mississippi. Aside from the fact that they were, their lives were, and there were all kinds of different things that they, just black people oppressed all the time. So here they were coming to help the black people. And then the black people down there that they were helping, they would call them boss, and they would look for them, and just the minutia of racism or that hierarchy in the South. And there were just a lot of things in which it was hard, and you had to change yourself, right? So I mean, so these young people, it does not compare. They weren't really extracting anything. I mean, look. As far as what life means in America for you, right? I mean, most the talk that black people have, with their kids, they didn't seem to have that talk.
Thank you. Lisa, I want to ask you a question now. Fun Home, the graphic novel, is one of the most banned books in America. And you wrote an amazing musical that's based on Fun Home. And so, which is an adaptation of Fun Home. And it's had its own unique set of challenges as it's traipsed across the country. And I'm wondering if you could talk just a little bit about the things that you've encountered in the current cultural landscape and some of the recent obstacles that you've seen other musicals in America facing.
Yeah, right. The book is banned all the time.
Yeah.
In my experience, I mean, when we were working on it, Fun Home came to Broadway at the perfect time. If it had been 5 years, 3 years, maybe even 2 years earlier, I don't believe the play would have gone to Broadway.
Can you say what it's about, just really quickly?
Yes,
for those
Fun Home is it's based on Alison Bechdel's graphic novel. It's a memoir of her childhood, and she grew up in Beech Creek, Pennsylvania, a small town with a father who was an English teacher, and he ran the family business, which was the Bechdel Funeral Home. And he lovingly, over her entire childhood, restored this Gothic revival house that they grew up in. And when she went to college, she realized she was lesbian. She called her parents and she told them, and her mother said, "Oh, well, your father's been sleeping with young men your whole life." And then the family sort of, there were 4 months where nothing really happened. Things were a little strange, but and then her father stepped in front of a truck and killed himself. And then 20 years later, she starts to write Fun Home to sort of understand, sort of go back through her childhood with this information the way I interpreted actually the action of it, as I had to come up with a dramatic action for this graphic novel, is that she essentially re-narrativizes the events of her childhood with this knowledge. So that's what it's about. And previously, Allison had spent 20 years writing a comic strip, a beloved comic strip called Dykes to Watch Out For. So she is, one of the sort of main central beloved creators of the dyke culture of the 80s, 90s, 2000s. Yeah, so, I think Fun Home happened to make it, be ready to move when, at the moment that, I feel like I should break into song now. That, if culture is a scaffolding that makes us visible to each other, over time, you need a kind of accretion of culture to be able to see different kinds of people. And that hadn't existed for lesbians. And it was many, many years of artistic, cultural, political work, decades, hundreds of years, that it reached, I had the experience early in my career of, doing shows downtown that were apprehendable, and then moving into other spaces where they literally couldn't be read because we were not apprehendable to more mainstream audiences. So we had very, very lucky timing. That being said, at every step of the way, there was a fear that we weren't, that it wasn't going to work, and people would say, I don't think audiences will be able to accept it. We'd say, do you have a problem with it? No, I loved it, but I think other people won't be able to. And that happened all the time. When it was going to when we were nominated for Tonys, and I have to say, it never occurred to me, because there were a number of things that that my straight collaborators were like, of course we're going to do that. And I was like, okay, because I was sort of conditioned to think that certain things weren't possible. So it was a good combination in that way. But I was like, what number are we going to do on the Tonys? And they were like, well, obviously it's Ring of Keys, which is an anthem that this little girl sings looking at this butch woman, sort of in a moment of recognition. And at CBS, we would not have had the trajectory that we had we not had absolutely incredible producers who never apologized for the piece and really championed it. That was absolutely crucial. So at CBS, our producer, they were told we're going to do Ring of Keys, and the producers said, no, it's too explicit. And I love this about Kristen Caskey, our producer, who, rather than fighting with them, said, oh, that's interesting. We're not aware that anything's explicit. Can you say what's explicit? And then there's nothing explicit in the song, And then they, said something else, like it's too sexual. And she was like, oh, I didn't know there was any sexuality in it. Can you show me where? And they went back and forth like that several times until the only thing left for them to say is that we don't want a child to sing a lesbian song, and we don't want to hear the word butch, and they weren't willing to say it out loud, and so we were able to do it. Otherwise, I guess, what happens isn't a lot is not that. Sometimes shows get canceled, but often they just don't get booked, and it's been very moving over the past several years to look at the bookings of Fun Home. Tiny, tiny community theaters in Oklahoma, in Tennessee, in Virginia, in Mississippi, all really incredibly moving. Many of them. And I can't say this for sure, but it looks like red state bookings in this year, I don't see them. I don't see them so far in this year. So I don't know if that's true or not, but I think there might be a pullback in some of those places where there obviously was an appetite for it.
And so just a follow-up question. When you look at the landscape in those red states and you're not seeing your shows being booked, what is the pushback? How are you addressing this sudden absence of the work in these spaces?
Well, it's an absence I became aware of today in preparation for this panel. But I was thinking about it actually on the way here, So thank you very much for that. But I was thinking about it on the way here, and I guess I was thinking, of individual outreach to the places that have done it. Yeah, I think supporting people who are brave enough to do it, or interested. Yeah, I don't really know beyond that, but that's just what I was thinking about today.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you point out how the play is disappearing in certain spaces, because I was looking at Dramatis play service listing of my play Sweat, and I notice that this is the first year in which it's completely dropped off. That suddenly it's not being booked into high schools, it's not being booked into community theaters across the country, and I don't think that that's an accident.
I think we should. I think not necessarily here, but I think it's something that we should.
We should.
I think we should
look. I do. I think that one of the things we should do is begin documenting where our shows are disappearing, which is difficult. But I think that it's really important to understand the patterns that are out there.
Documenting and thinking if there's some incentive to help strengthen people. I think obviously there's a lot of. Obeying in advance, or just, fear and pullback, and a feeling that, that punishment for doing these things is inevitable. And I think as we can embolden people to not cede that space preemptively, maybe there are things that we can do to sort of help to, when the book was banned, at the University of Charleston, and a bunch of funding was withdrawn from some program there, the Fun Home Company went to Charleston, and we did this kind of impromptu performance. So I think that kind of support is very meaningful.
And I know that you're an activist, and a question that I often get asked on these platforms is, what is our responsibility as an artist? And I always bristle at that question, because I do think that we are second responders, and that our job really is to sort of reflect and process. But in moments like this, and where there is such urgency, I'm just curious, like, how you're processing your role right now.
I don't know. I personally have not thought of my art as my activism. But when I was first performing, I used to say there's nothing actually political about my work. What it feels political, because at that time, to stand on stage and just presume that everybody knew I was a lesbian, and sort of proceed as if that worldview was obvious and natural, that it was the context that made it political rather than the work itself. So I guess the degree to which I want to not be afraid to continue to self-identify as a lesbian, as a dyke, in my work, I don't really know how to do anything different besides that. And then I guess it feels, we were talking about this before, sort of stabilizing and life-saving for me, first of all, to just pay attention to the activism that's going on around me. Otherwise, I feel panicked and hopeless, to get on the indivisible calls on Thursdays. It'll make you feel better, I guarantee it. I don't read the New York Times anymore. I have my specific Substack people. I subscribe to Rebecca Solnitz's newsletter. I highly recommend it. those kind of things. I was just been reading Erica Chenoweth, political scientist, who has sort of done studies that show that if 3.9% of the population resists, that is the turning point to push back against authoritarian governments. That is 3.9%. So, that is very, very hopeful. And she's also like pointing out different strategies. Like we go to marches and we do whatever, but also non-cooperation, the strategy of non-cooperation, so learning about those things, learning about, at night I watch these stupid little YouTube documentaries, many of them out of Chicago, about, activists in the around the Gilded Age, so, just reading about other times and other activists and noticing there's just a lot going on. There's a lot going on. So I try to turn toward that also.
Thank you for that. Moisés, your play Laramie Project, which was written by you and the Tectonic Theater Project, is one of the most important and produced plays in all of America. It's also one of the most censored plays in all of America. You recently had a production that was in Texas that was at a high school, and it was canceled and reinstated, but the theater administration wanted to replace it with Mary Poppins, right? But it was kind of beautiful that the students prevailed and it was put on. And so I guess the question that I want to ask you is just a little bit about the journey of the play itself and also how it's managed to continue to thrive in an environment that has been so difficult and so resistant to its existence.
I think we wrote the play in the year 2000, and what happens is that every year since, as widely produced as it is, there's always 3 or 4 high schools or community theaters that ban it. So the board of directors of the school would ban it.
And can you say, just for people who don't know the play, a little bit about what it...
Oh, the Laramie Project is about the murder of Matthew Shepard, who was a young University of Wyoming student who was gay, who went to a bar and met 2 guys, and they said, "We're gay too, come with us." And they took him to a fence and to the outskirts of town, and they tied him to a fence and they beat him unconscious. And then he was found the next day, taken to the hospital, survived for 3 days, and then passed away. And it became a watershed historical moment in America, because it was the first time that that kind of act of violence had the notoriety. It was in every newspaper. It was in every, And so a month after the crime, all of the members of our theater company, we traveled to Laramie. We talked to the people of the town for a year, and then we wrote the play. So the play chronicles the life of the town the year after Matthew Shepard died. But every year since it started being produced all around the country, there were several theaters that would ban it, either the board of the theater or the board of the school. And the first thing that we noticed that was interesting is they never said, "It's because it's gay." They would say, "Oh, there's too much violence in the play." Or, "Oh, it uses the faggot word too many times." Or, "It's hard for students to deal with that." One of the things that I've noticed about censorship is that there's always an unwillingness to own up to what the censorship is really about, right? So, but what ended up happening was that the students who were denied the chance to do their play, was the first time that they experienced censorship on their own skin. And invariably, that backfired. So what would happen is that the students would rent a space next door to the high school and do the plays. And invariably, we would get emails or calls, and then we would send out press releases to newspapers in the town where the high school was happening, and in New York City, to people to talk about it. And many times there was so much backlash, like it just happened, as you said, in Texas, that they had to either reinstate the play or help the students stage it outside of the school. which was delicious. But not we didn't always succeed. There were times when it was just canceled, and that was the end of it. What has been there are two things that have been really interesting. One is that in the last 2 years, it's been the first time that the book itself was banned. Until now, it was only the productions that were banned, but now the book is being banned. So there was in Lansing, Kansas, where there was a classroom where they banned the book. So immediately, Tectonic Theater Project made contact with one of the students in the class and said, how many students are there in the class? We'll send you the books. And we sent them the books, and then we got these letters from the students about what that had meant to them and why, and them trying to process why. But then the other thing, and you see this in history, is that a lot of censorship is under the disguise that they are trying to battle part of the discourse of that which is being censored. But the truth is that what they're trying to censor is the community that is speaking, right? So historically, the books that are censored are books by black writers, by LGBT writers, by immigrants, right? So it's not that what's being tried to be censored is the actual text of the book. It's the people who are writing the book. And I think that at least for us, that has been a double sword weapon, because on the one hand, it becomes very clear to the people who are being banned that that's what's going on, and it encourages a certain kind of activism. It was like one of the things about the play is that it documents the church that would come and boycott the Baptist church, what is it called? Westboro Baptist Church. So they came to Matthew Shepard's funeral and protested the funeral, right? They're the God hates fags church. And so what happened is that church would also go to high schools or go to universities or go to community theaters to protest the play. So the actors had to walk by this church on their way to the theater. And on the one hand, of course, we were all mortified. On the other hand, this was the best possible thing that could have happened to the production. Number one, because it gave it an incredible amount of publicity. And number two, because the actors got to experience on their skin what the play was about. So somebody was joking that we had to send a royalty check to the Westboro Baptist Church. But we decided to send it to somebody else we liked better. But I just want to say something else about because that's the kind of censorship that we know, right? But what you were talking about, the censorship of the students that called you and said, we're not going to do the play. There's this super interesting study that Harvard did. It's called horizontal violence. And what they discovered was that every group that is oppressed, there will come a time in their fight for liberation that instead of fighting vertically and against the forces that are oppressing them, they will do horizontal violence against other people who are being oppressed. Why? Because the rage is so intense that they would that you will attack that which is closest to you and that which you have more access to. So it's much easier to have access to you and to say we're not doing this because that word offends us than it is to actually get together and try to fight. So I think that this question of horizontal violence is one of the most pernicious things that is attacking our activist movement. That we are so quick to jump on each other's throats as opposed to really focusing on who
Moisés, before you mentioned that in this moment you're experiencing double trauma. And I was wondering whether you can just talk a little bit, because you're Venezuelan and you have seen sort of the complications of your home country and come here and you're in a moment in which you're facing sort of a new kind of trauma. So I just was wondering whether you could speak to that.
I think the short version, I'm Venezuelan. I came to America right before Chavez came to power, but my entire family was there, and I kept going back, and I witnessed so many of the things that are happening here. How Chavez slowly began to dismantle what was until that moment one of the strongest, sturdiest, and longest democracies in Latin America. So what I was saying is that I'm having PTSD because I'm seeing the same playbook when there are law firms that immediately capitulate to the government, where there's Columbia University that immediately capitulates, that those acts of capitulation are the most dangerous things that we're witnessing right now. And it's incredible. And at the same time, we were talking that there's a lot of people who are doing resistance. You know, Harvard is doing resistance. There are, Bill Powers, who just quit 60 Minutes. Those are acts of resistance. And I feel like, when you ask what is our responsibility, what do we do? What do we talk about? I don't know the answer. It's too soon, and we're being bombarded by a barrage of so much. But my hunch is that one thing we can do is to talk about those acts of resistance. That perhaps there's something in there, that spirit of resistance. Because if you look at any totalitarian movement, no totalitarian move. I love the 3.9%. That's brilliant. I never heard that. But no totalitarian movement can survive or soar without the professional classes' support, whether it's lawyers or doctors or teachers. And it is in those places where real resistance can occur. And unfortunately, those are also the places that are most available to be corrupted.
Yeah, it's like staying on this notion of capitulation. One of the things that really keeps me up at night is this notion of anticipatory disobedience, and how quickly all of our institutions are surrendering or making choices in anticipation of what the government will do. And I guess the question that I have, and perhaps you've answered it in part, is I wonder, like, what is this ripple effect on the artists? And when I'm sitting down at my computer, I wonder whether I'm already beginning to censor myself before I even begin writing. And I wonder how I can resist that impulse, and how can I turn my practice into a form of resistance. And once I have written something, how can I address the institutions that are now reluctant to invite certain kinds of conversations into their spaces? And, these are the things that I struggle with. And I struggle with, in a year, will there be a platform for the kind of plays that I'm writing, because the institutions are so frightened as a result of their funding sources being cut off. We know now that foundations are under attack. And once the foundations are under attack, it means that our institutions are going to be strangled, because they're the primary sources of their funding. But I guess I throw this question out to you, is just like, how are you processing your actual artistic practice in this moment?
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I think the thing that terrifies me the most is abstract expressionism. Because when McCarthy came to power, the visual artists decided to do abstract expressionism, which is a movement that gave us great beauty and many incredible things. But it was a way for visual artists to protect themselves, because it was the least political thing you could do, right? We all admire Jackson Pollock, but you cannot say, right, that Pollock poses a political threat to anything. That's not entirely true, but you know what I mean. And after abstract expressionism, pop art came to being. So we had 15 years where all of the visual arts that were so politically committed in the 40s and 30s, right, with the WPA and all of a sudden there's this moment where the artists are taking themselves out of the political arena. And to me that terrifies me. I don't know what to do about it, because I know that it is an instinct, a survival instinct, right? That how do we survive this moment? I think that look, as writers and as artists, we always have a hunch of something we want to create. And in my case, I've always wanted to create something that exists at the intersection of the personal and the political. And I just have to stay true to that.
Yeah, Lisa, yeah.
I don't. I hear you. I don't think. I don't think there's a theatrical version of abstract expressionism. I, theater is social, and it is ultimately about ethical relationships, consciously or not. It's about society, and it definitely can. I mean, there are definitely work that can uphold the status quo and work that can challenge the status quo. I have a sort of pet theory that there's no better actually formula for boffo box office stratospheric success than something appears to be subversive but actually is upholding the status quo. And I have always kept institutions at sort of arm's length, because when I was starting, they were not open to me. And so I think we're actually coming out of the healthy version, or the version that we're starting to lament of our theater is a theater where we have really struggled with the gatekeepers. Everybody here has struggled with the gatekeepers, right? It has lost its place. It really lost its place, with some notable exceptions. My fellow playwrights here, prime examples of this. It lost its place as an important place in the cultural conversation, because those institutions were aiming for a subscription audience. But I think because where my sort of true theatrical imagination in my career was lit was in subculture, where there was no career to be had, there was no money to be made. What we did have was cheap space, and literally we made productions for $400. And they were, some of them were not so good, but some of them were amazing. I mean, it lit a theatrical flame in me that still is my touchstone to this day. So I think it's helpful to sort of separate out. So I have never been a defender of the institutions. It's funny now, like with so many things, I'm like, oh no, the Kennedy Center, it's like, whoever thought we'd like defend the IRS, I mean, not the IRS, but the FBI, there's like any number of things that now we're like, hands off that. And it's like, what, well, who am I? What's happening? And I feel that way a little bit about theater institutions. I mean, how long did we work to try to get gender parity? And we just got there, and well, but in a way, I guess. So don't get me wrong. I feel confused. I feel afraid. I feel all of the things, and also this is theater's moment. This is theater's moment, because you can make theater anywhere. You can make it anywhere, and you can make it out of anything, and that is its superpower, really.
Yeah, here. Carlyle, can I ask you a question? Yeah. You've spoken about how this moment feels very much like the clock is turning backward and that everything's topsy-turvy and upside down. And you said to ask me about an expression. And that expression is, before we can change the world, we have to change ourselves. And so I was wondering whether you could just elaborate on that.
Well, I guess it comes from the context of that play. One of the things that sort of drove the civil rights movement as a movement, right? I mean, black people didn't trust institutions, had good reason not to trust institutions anyway. As a it's just a fact of history. And so for me as a writer, I want to continue the legacy of my predecessors, which is to criticize the institutions and explore the ways and kind of which we live. in the civil rights movement, you didn't have to get a card or anything. You just showed up, right? And you were uh, showed up and willing to take the. I mean, I wasn't going to be nonviolent, so they had something else for me to do. But nobody was really turned away that was committed. But the thing that really drove are the people who like King and like Abernathy and John Lewis. Those guys, they really believed in that Christian thing, that their life, that they wanted to live their life as much as they could, like Christ. And you didn't have to do that, but if you're being led by people with that kind of commitment and conviction, that sort of sets a tone for the people that follow you. And you have to address that. How far are you willing to go? Are you willing to spill your own blood or somebody else's blood? I mean, you have to ask yourself these questions, to be part of that group, that part of that movement. I don't think you can just get up in the morning and be an activist. You got to do some contemplation. You got to study. You got to learn stuff. And most of us have to learn what it means to be serious. So.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And, the question that I ask myself, at what point am I willing to put, my body and my spirit in harm's way in order to achieve some change? And I'm thinking also, Lisa, about the 3.9%. And I wonder aloud, where is our activist, our artist community? Why aren't we in dialogue with each other every single second of the day right now? And what can we do to forge community? And I put that question to you because it's something I struggle with. And I see, and people are out there and people are working, but for whatever reason, we can't seem to build a movement that has momentum. And so, I throw that out to you. What do we need to do in this moment that we're not doing?
One of the things we have to do is in putting yourself in the framework is, one of the things that happened to those people is they were young and they thought we thought we were going to change the world by the time we're 30.
Yeah.
And the fact is that we're just part of a continuum, right? And you just have to have faith that somebody down the street is doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
And somebody down the road a couple of years is doing what you're doing. You have to believe yourself that you have some value that you could put forth and that somebody else is doing. And accept that it's unknown. I mean, I don't know if we know that's true, that people are not finding community, but I think we have to believe that people are going to do that that's going to happen. And when you see each other, you'll know. You'll know each other. That's my.
Lisa?
What?
No, So I guess the question that I have, and just struggling with the fact that there is, as I said earlier, that there's this incredible urgency to do something, and the thing that I struggle with is how difficult it has been to forge community and build a movement within. Let me not just say the artistic world, but let me be more specific and say within the theater community, to push back at what's happening. I think that it does happen, but it happens in isolation. And I wonder what it's going to take for all of us to become more unified and to be less isolated or siloed in the way in which we resist.
Yeah. I mean, it might be that that's not the nexus of community. I mean, I think part of what's happened, I think, to theater artists is that our primary relationships, certainly for many students that I've dealt with, when they picture their career, the relationship they're thinking about is with an institution, with an artistic director, with a college professor, as opposed to with an audience, or with a community. I mean, I think that's just a setup that has, to my mind, sort of drained some vitality out of the field. So it might be that that's not the nexus that brings us together. I do think that, one of the things that theater, one of the great strengths that it has is it's people together in a room in real life. And I think it's about to become apparent to us, hopefully, how important that is, and that it is a secret weapon. It is a secret weapon. All the things we feel when we look at our devices, and there are connections that are made, and there are things that are being facilitated, and they are through the platform of evil people who are harming us terribly and stealing our data and, doing all the things we're doing. We don't need to get into it. It's not easy in terms of discomfort. I keep trying to remind myself that we actually have the option to turn away from that thing. We don't need to be in its clutches. And so the thing about theater, thinking a lot about community theaters, seeing theater has an effect on us, but making theater, that really is a transformative, democracy building, community building thing. That thing of being in a room with other people, and we're in the crazy 1984 classic authoritarian thing where truth is disengaged from anything that we know to be true, right? It's just whatever they say is true, 2 + 2 is 5, right? That's the primary tool of the authoritarian playbook, is to have us go along with that. So to be in actual rooms affirming truth that we know, human truth, affirming the experience, enacting the experience of decency, of human dignity. Those things feel like the important things, and I guess the possibility. I think it's going to have to do with disengage. We've been so focused on questions of pay, of equity, very important question, of health insurance, of all of those things, very important questions. I personally feel like they need to be answered with universal health care, not by theaters. I don't think, anyway, we don't need to get into that because whatever right now with it. But I think part of the problem we don't have community is that that's where we've been looking instead of comatose, instead of the thing that makes us care about theater, which is the very thing about it that is non-commodifiable. That's our power. And if we focus on that, then that's what we'll build.
And thank you for that. And I will reframe my question, because I think it's an interesting proposition to think about this in terms of the audience. And so I guess my question is, without the institutions and in a world in which we are so fractured, how do we find and harness the power of our audiences? How do we connect with them, and enough of them to make some profound difference?
I think more important to the institutions and even us are the stories and how they land on people. The Free Southern Theater, which came out of that kind of same movement, did a great service in informing people about how the structure works and sort of like reflecting back on them into their lives. And so I think maybe it's the intention of the work which is primal. And, we are the instruments of that. And if the work is intended to bring people to a place where they can have community and be community, I mean, I don't really, think of the institution of theater in the American theater as a community-making enterprise.
I'm going to answer it in a little bit of a circuitous way. That's the word Venezuelans cannot say. Circuitous, how do you say it? Circuitous? Okay. Still, there are some, 30 years living in this country, there are some words that...
That was so anti-Venezuelan of you.
I'm an anti-Venezuelan. I'm xenophobe.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I just want to go back to what we were talking about, because I agree with Lisa very much that there's no equivalent in theater to abstract expressionism. Do you think there is?
I do think there is, and I could make an argument. I think that there was absurdist theater. I think about rhinoceroses and certain plays.
And like the Bold Soprano.
Yeah.
But I think that was more absurdist. I think that I'm not going to... For me, what I thought when you said that was that idea of abstract color. Theater is about humans, and it happens in a culture, so it's always a political act. But I think that what I meant when I said I'm afraid of abstract expressionism is that at any given moment, we choose what we write about. We choose what we direct. We choose what plays we do. And I think that we are in terrible danger of that moment of decision being corrupted by the situation, in which you make decisions of like, it's not abstract, but imagine that instead of doing the Laramie Project, I decide to do Crazy for You. You know, you're right that is a play that just reinforces a certain status quo. It's not like abstract expressionism. But I think that like what I am interested in is how do we as a community of creators continue to support each other to make the difficult choices? And that to me is a question that, but anyway, but I would love to.
Well, I mean, you know, Shakespeare, it was not allowed to put political subjects on stage.
Right.
So you write allegorically, right. You know. And I was reading today about apparently a very robust theater of resistance that maybe some of you know about this, that existed in the Philippines at the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century, when the Philippines were fighting for independence from Spanish and then American rule. Absolutely incredible love stories in which each character represented some political entity. It was very clear to everybody what was happening. And then when that was cracked down on, they would take traditional plays and do things like have people in costumes that in a certain moment would assemble to form the Philippine flag, which was illegal, and then disperse, things like that. And they paid a price for it. But I think that even when I think people have always figured out a way in theater to talk about the thing without talking about the thing. I think that's actually something that theater excels at.
I just keep worrying about even making the decision to do that. It's a decision that we are being told right now is very dangerous. How do we, as a culture of theater makers, support one another in making that decision?
I agree with that. And I would love now to just open this up to some audience questions. Yes.
Thank you.
So institutions are censoring and making things difficult for the theater makers. Audiences seem to be much more curious, and how do you find the audiences that you're writing for?
I think what has been interesting with Blueberries is that I started writing the play with my co-writer Amanda Gronick the first time that Trump was president. And it was as a response to that. And then we opened when Biden was president, and it had a response. And then now it's on a national tour. And what we're finding is that the play is exactly the same, the production is exactly the same, and yet the play feels completely different. Because the climate has changed, and we saw Elon Musk doing the Sieg Heil on public television. So the play is perceived completely different, and what we're finding is that the audience is much hungrier for it. There is a real, you can feel their investment in the material. They feel like it's articulating something that they've been thinking about. So I think that that is a positive thing to think about, that the audiences really want us to be speaking about what they're feeling.
Hi. So I was on a panel with Erica last month at Harvard talking about protest. And I'm a playwright, but my most recent book is a protest history of the United States, looking at a 500-year arc. And my play that I'm working on is actually looking at examining the question of who owns history. So I think it's great to look at the past, and especially learning from the civil rights movement. I was in Selma last week for the 60th anniversary of the March across the Independence Bridge. But I also think it's good to look to the future. And maybe what's missing is a vision for the future. Because we can protest against something, but we also have to have a vision for the future. And they have a vision.
Yeah.
We don't like their vision for what they want in 2045 when the country is majority people of color. But it has like two parts. One is that vision for the future generally, but also the resistance theater and the theater of the civil rights movement, and the types of theater that came out during the 1960s and 70s also had an edge, and it had political commentary and had all of that. So where can that, is that someplace you can just do the living room? Is that possible now that we can just have that type of resistance theater, that type of political theater that we had before during these difficult times, given the institutionalization of theater now? Where are we going to go for that? You said that it's easier to find places, you can just do it anywhere, but what's the vision overarching so that we can be participatory members of the resistance of going forward, but also how do we use theater in small ways, large ways to be a part of that resistance? Is it New York City? Do we have to go outside of New York City? Can we afford to do that kind of theater you're talking about that we used to do back when people could do resistance plays and resistance musicals?
If I can answer that question, because I do think it's a really good question. I'm going to answer the second part, and it's I feel that the theater, the black box, the proscenium, has really sort of boxed in the notion of what theater can be and its potential. And I think that what we have to think about is those non-traditional spaces where we can put on our shows. I think that too often we think that we need this kind of proximity with us on the stage and the people in the audience for it to be defined as theater. And I don't think that's true. We have to really shift our notion of the spaces where it can occur, the shape that it can take, and who our audiences are. I do think you can have an audience of 10, and that could be an audience on the subway. It could be an audience in a park. It can be an audience in your church. It can be an audience at a dinner party. And I think that the more we think about where we can tell our stories, other than the traditional institutions, the more we can begin to build a community of theater artists who can push back at what's happening. But I think that the tyranny of the proscenium is what's really trapping us in, or I shouldn't say trapping us, is limiting us in the ways in which we can tell our stories.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And there are a million answers to that question. There are a million answers to that question. There's not one audience. There are a million audiences, and they're all different. And also, I mean, I've said this many times, but I think what I learned when I was, downtown at the Wow Cafe is that the power of an artist, and the reason artists are viewed as dangerous in these kind of structures, is that the fact is an artist confers their authority upon themselves. You confer your authority upon yourself. That is very dangerous. So that would be my answer to you. It is every artist's capacity to envision where you want to do your theater, what you want it to be like. It's, of course, very different theater you make with a lot of resources than with none. But within your and you know, as Taylor Mack said to me one time, all theater is local. That's the point, you know. So there is no one grand audience.
There isn't, and just to follow up on that, I used to have an exercise that I did with my students. I called it the hazing exercise, but what I invited them to do is to create a piece of theater that they would take to the streets, and they had to get at least 5 people to stop and listen. And, you know, the astonishing thing was watching how they took this exercise to heart, and then once witnessing one of these students give a speech in which 100 people stopped to listen. And I thought, that's the power of theater. And all he had was just his body, his voice, and this incredibly powerful story that touched people.
I think having witnessed Lisa's work from early on, that idea of the artist conferring power to herself, the work that the Five Lesbian Brothers was doing, you know, back then, it was so revolutionary because it was, as she said, in the Wow Cafe, in spaces that were, but he was speaking to all of us about freedom and about the possibility of the imagination. And so I think that what you said is, I love what you said.
This one.
Hi, my name is Louise Carter. I like theater because, especially world theater, because world theater is like, it's like life, and it reminds me of like environmental science. So environmental science is like about where we live and how we habitat and how we move and how we have our being. So I really like the whole theater because I've done theater in the past with stage center. And I also like see other theaters before me and stuff like that. So I really like the whole sciences because I used to study chemistry, inorganic chemistry, organic chemistry, anatomy, physiology, microbiology, all these sciences that affects the environment or people's lives. And I just want to thank you guys for having theater because it's really the best thing of it.
Thank you for that. I think this is one last question.
Hi. Sorry, Natalie. I was really responding. Is it Carlyle?
Yeah.
Here's I don't know, it's a question of whether it's, you know, talking about how the way, what I find scary, and I don't know how you guys deal with it in terms of teaching, how often, a lot of times, certain students have become the oppressor. To silence you, to silence your work, means that your play means that person has become the oppressor. I'm not crazy about Gone with the Wind. I've never seen so many happy slaves in my life. Now, having said that, had it not been for Hattie McGann, we wouldn't be here right now doing this kind of work. So how do you handle it, like when students are saying, I don't want to read this, I don't want to read that, this is no good? I mean, obviously the First Amendment has been bastardized. But when we take away work that we disagree with simply because it makes us uncomfortable, then we have become the oppressor. And also, like Lynn, when you were saying about being, when people talk about being triggered, you're absolutely right. There's a big difference between trigger and trauma. I go to the theater to be triggered. Yeah? So, in terms of the educational stuff, I mean, that's the thing that worries me in terms of like the teaching thing, where students, certain students, not all, you know, I don't have to read this because my cohort said that it was bad. I don't want to do this because I don't want, and I'm using the word nigga. Whoever doesn't like that stuff. I don't want to use the word nigga because this holds us. That's what you were saying. That's exactly the point. The point is you are supposed to. This thing is supposed to get into your bones. Yeah. So how do you guys handle it in terms of the educational thing? I was just kind of curious.
I think, well, I write history plays about black people who've, you know, been down this road before. And so what I try to pay attention to is, you know, not just the human struggles and stuff, but the landscape of the politics that puts you in that situation. Because I think that's important. You know, like Threepenny Opera or plays like that. You know what I mean? Like when the bank goes down, you know, where your audience could say, yes, that's it. That's it. And when a group of people come to an agreement and see that at one time, which is the whole idea of what we're trying to do to collective an audience, that's powerful. And, you know, it's just like we've written plays and people go out of the theater and they carry that with them. And it goes someplace else. And I think movements can be created out of that.
You speaking about the young people just really broke my heart because I work with young people and the difficulty that is who they are in the world and managing that and having a sense of entitlement and not being comfortable, not being comfortable being uncomfortable. Like how, like my role as an educator, how can I make that be, this is life, right? That you can be in an uncomfortable situation and feel wretched, upset, and that is okay not to be okay. You know what I mean? Like, what do we do as a society? Like, because we're talking about kids that were in the civil rights and the kids that are here now. And you're talking about this particular mode of how we think and how we address love, how we move in it, how we engage in it. And so this is our kids that we have now, not those kids. And what do we do as a society? What do we do as an individual, as a mom, as a neighbor, you know, as an educator, to get kids to just a shift in like, it is okay not to be okay. And that the journey and the end of that is that's what it is. Yeah. To get to that, you know, like in my head, like you're talking, and I'm like, I do that. Yeah, I do that. Yeah, how do I do that?
Yeah, I mean that's what I was thinking when I was like being addressed when we were talking in the room. Is that like, why hasn't somebody in this institution dealt with this? You know what I mean? Why are they? You know, why isn't this not just censorship, but why isn't this a lesson that we could all learn and kind of move forward? And there wasn't that kind of leadership.
Well, I was just going to say, I probably haven't dealt with this as much as many of you here have, but and I know that feeling of, you got to be kidding me. That being said, I think, or I presume, that where it's coming from is from a question about an actual struggle with the issue of narrative inequity, which is profound and which is real. I think that's where these things rise from, you know? I mean, I remember in the 80s, my friend saying to me, if I go to another comedy that I've been told is a comedy and I see a woman being raped, I'm going to lose it. You know, that is, and I always has that as a touchstone. So I guess when I deal with it, when I have dealt with this, I always want to think, okay, I want to affirm that as a thing that I am also concerned about first, you know, because I think there's obviously tons of pushback to this coming from the right. The right loves this, right? So to me, to affirm or to say, I'm also concerned, I also see as a real problem, narrative inequity, the inequity of who gets to have centrality and be seen is granted subjectivity. From there, that feels to me a firmer ground on which then to talk about how we're going to get narrative, how we're going to achieve that goal. I want to agree about a goal or offer that as a goal that I'm interested in, and then from there say, is this the best way to get it? How do we want to get it?
If I'm just going to quickly respond to your question before you wrap up, and I'm going to answer this in a micro way because you ask, how do I deal with the students in the classroom. And I think that making art is a very dangerous act. And so the first thing that I try to do is create a safe space where people can be 100% authentically themselves. And that's hard. It's hard to build that space. And that space involves trust, and it involves honesty. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But that's all we can do, is to endeavor to create sanctuaries and spaces where art can be made. And hopefully, I teach those students, and they take that, they take what they learn out into the world, and then they create those spaces in turn.
I knew some of us are going for an 8 o'clock event that's across the street, and I want to have a round of applause in a moment, but I just want to say first of all, we need you for hours more, days more, and years more, especially the next 3+ years. So thank you for joining us. The 2025 Penn World Voices Festival is first, so please visit penn.org/festival, buy tickets to the remaining events to learn more about your favorite authors. Be sure to follow at Penn World Voices, and we'd love if you share your experience and your reactions to this event on social media using the hashtag for the love of books. So join me, please.
Yeah, thank you to everyone. Thank you, Moisés, Lisa, Carlyle.